Thanks very much. I'm the host of today's first session, which is how to manage intense competition at 11+. And we've got a bit of a microphone crisis going on here, which is why I'm standing at a lectern. It's not because I want to lord it over our three wonderful speakers, but it's the only way I can make myself heard along with our three wonderful guests. So I just want to introduce our three guests on the panel and explain what we're going to talk about. So first of all, we have Catriona Sutherland-Hawes, who is the Director of Admissions at Wycombe Abbey, and she was at Latimer Upper School and has had huge experience at managing highly competitive 11+ admissions. And with her is Bridget Saul, the head teacher of Vale School in Chelsea. And Bridget's been there for a year, starting in September 2020, but before that was for 8 years at Wandsworth Prep, and before that at Thomas's. So huge experience in the London prep school market. And last but not least, as they say, is William Petty, who's the Managing Director of Bonas MacFarlane, the highly regarded tuition and education advisory company. Now, my kids went through the 11+ 4 or 5 years ago, and post-traumatic stress disorder has not eradicated the memory of what it was like to sit, or rather for my daughter to sit 6 different exams. But without wishing to pick out an individual on this panel, Kat at the time was the head of admissions at Latimer Upper, which is one of the schools my daughter applied to, and I was immensely impressed this morning when she could remember exactly who my daughter was and could also remember Bridget's niece, who's also at Latimer. So the kind of attention to detail that you get from the professionals working in these schools is something to behold. But I want to start, obviously, as a parent, based on my experience, by asking our panellists to please address the biggest issue, which is why are there so many different exams? I think my daughter sat one exam for Girls' Day School Trust schools, but obviously had to sit a number of others for the other schools she applied to. Bridget, let's start with you. If you can compete against the helicopter that is flying in the latest batch of parents to this conference.
Good morning, everybody. I mean, I think the answer is that at 11+, there's no one size fits all, and what you will find is that there are different exams to assess the different skills for children. Sometimes they're digital, sometimes they're written, sometimes they're done at the prep school, sometimes they're done at the senior school, and that's very much part of the process for the school and for the individual processes, I think, for each school.
Kat.
Good morning. I would say Bridget's absolutely right. One size does not fit all, and I have 2 golden rules, and one of them is there's a right place for everyone. And our job as schools is to find the right people to be in the right place, because if your child is not in the right place, they will not be happy, they will not thrive. We're all looking for different things. Different schools have different academic levels. I currently work for a school that has very, very high academic levels. We need to make sure these girls are right, that they are going to be keeping up, that they're going to enjoy it and thrive. You've also got to be aware of where they're coming from. So the previous school I worked in, Latimer Upper, has a very much more diverse intake. A number of children are coming out of state schools. They have a big bursary program, and a number of children are coming out of state schools where there's no preparation. Some of the prep schools are able to prepare, some parents are preparing their children. There are a number of children who simply haven't got the preparation, have the benefit of that. So you've got to have some form of test that allows you to see their ability and potential and not what they've been taught. So I think we're all doing different things because we're all looking for different things with the same end goal, which is getting the child to the right place.
William, do you get a sense of frustration from the parents you deal with that some of them have kids who are having to do lots of different exams, or do you sympathise with the perspective of the schools that one size doesn't fit all?
Both, essentially. Parents, obviously with the 11+, it's extremely scary, and the London parent paranoia, particularly in London, gets really out of control. I heard Kat saying at a talk the other day, actually, don't listen to them. And she was talking about, literally everybody else. Talk to the schools. The reason they have the admissions processes they put in place is it's their best way of selecting the children they know they can support to their best quality and provision. They're not trying to catch you out. If you think you're trying to be caught out, I'm afraid it's probably not the school for your child. So, yes, it's very stressful. Yes, there are competing types of admissions, but now more than ever, actually, and COVID has helped, there are quite a lot of shared tests. So there are clusters of schools that might share different types of assessments so that your child's not literally doing 6, but just so we're clear, signing up for 6 schools is an act of madness in itself, although plenty of you will probably do it.
Right, so we won't dwell on the fact that my daughter signed up for 6 schools when she did the 11 plus. But what I do want, so let's take this in stages. So we accept that schools are going to have a different exam. A lot of schools will have a different exam because, as we say, one size fits all. Let's focus a bit on the prep schools where our children are before they take these exams. How do you, let's start with Bridget again, how do you prepare kids, particularly if you've got an insane parent like me whose kid is applying for 6 schools, how do you prepare them for this minefield of all sorts of different exams?
I mean, I think the key is to really, it's to have a very clear journey mapped out to start early and to start that communication early. I mean, what we do, I always like to think it's very important to hold parents' hand through the entire process because we realise that there are different schools and different exams. In terms of the curriculum, I think it's important to get children, what you don't want to do is in that first term of year 6 is just to collapse a timetable and have English, maths and exam practice. So what we do is starting in year 3, and then moving into year 4 and year 5, is start to prepare them gently. And that could be for something called the verbal reasoning and non-verbal reasoning tests. And that could be doing some tests online. So, I mean, doing some tests online can be great for the children because actually it takes away that this is potentially a practice exam, but actually it's seen as a bit of a puzzle. And then as you're weaving into the curriculum as well when they get into year 5, some exam questions, and having that exam question with the teachers there so that they get used to questions, and then small parts of exams, and that they do it in class and that it becomes part of the natural teaching process. And then I think alongside that as well is getting them ready for interviews. It's not just about the academics, it's getting them ready for interviews and to when they actually go to the schools to be confident that they've had practice, not worrying about if they make a mistake, and I think also getting them ready to be confident and tell their story when they go to the schools and talk about who they are and what they enjoy doing.
I want to talk about interviews in a minute, but I'm very interested in the preparation. I just want to ask Kat as well. You see it from the other end, as it were, and you presumably at Wycombe and at Latimer have good relationships with a lot of prep schools where you're confident that they know what kind of kids should go to Latimer or Wycombe. But also, you mentioned particularly with Latimer, a lot of state school pupils will apply. So how do you, at the other end of the relate to primary and prep schools?
Well, from a Wycombe Abbey point of view, we have girls applying from all over, all sorts of different schools, but a number of them are coming from prep schools. I'm fortunate in that I have good links with the prep schools. I know Bridget well. I went to see her in June. We have a couple of her girls have just joined us. We do talk to the schools, and I think parents don't realise that senior schools and prep schools do talk to each other, but we have very strong links with prep schools, with feeder schools, and that's really important because they're doing the groundwork to tell the parents at the right stage where the children, what might suit them, and they're then talking to us. So it's so helpful when they're doing the preparation, making sure that the child is applying to the right schools. And I think we were talking earlier about how many you should apply to, not 6, and how you should do that. And I think for me, I always will lift the phone to the feeder schools when we're making decisions, we're at the stage of we've interviewed them, we're thinking about who to offer, and just chat to them and say, is this right? Are we missing somebody? Should somebody have the benefit of the doubt because perhaps they didn't have such a great day or something had happened at home or they have potential? So I think that's really important. With the state schools where you perhaps don't have such good links, we will try to talk to them. And I think any good school is going to celebrate what their children are achieving and help them on the way, and we'll be happy to have a dialogue. So I think relationships with where we're talking to the prep schools are doing the groundwork at the right age. And just something Bridget said about starting it in year 4. For me, I think you start looking at schools for your children no earlier than year 4, and I'd even say towards year 5. You don't really know what they're like and what is going to suit them. And there's no point in looking at a school that is not going to be right for them and going around looking at all sorts of schools, exciting them about it, and raising their expectations to then say, actually, your prep head says that's not right. So don't do it too early.
So, William, there are lots of nuances to this debate, and you have an overview, obviously, of seeing a lot of different schools. I mean, do you... I think one of the most important things, weirdly, in preparing a kid at prep school for secondary school is actually choosing the right school. So what's your view on how important is it for the parents and the prep school to have a relationship where you can have a frank discussion about where your child should be thinking about going?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely vital, and it's something that I think perhaps some of my parents are surprised when they ask. But the first thing I ask anyone coming to us for our help is, have you spoken to your prep school? If they're in Britain, quite a lot of ours aren't to start out with, actually. But for the domestic clients, it's certainly, have you spoken to them, and what do they say? And if they're in front of me and they're asking for schools to go on their list that their current head teacher has told them are really probably not a good idea, then at that point I'm out the game, because already they've done something that makes our work very difficult. It's really important to be very frank at what your child can be expected to achieve. And my golden rule is, don't send them somewhere where they scrape in. All right, and I know I'm here as a part owner of a tuition business, although I don't spend my professional time with that anymore. But again, it happens. I know there are views on stage about that. But if you're using it to get into a school which is probably inaccessible, then that's double bad. So that's an absolute no. It won't go well. Even if they do get in, it will go even worse after that. So it's really important. Your prep school heads are the ones who understand your children in a learning environment more, I'm afraid, than you do. Certainly once they get past, year 3 and they're long in the teeth. Obviously, as parents, we're hopefully quite involved in the nursery years, etc. But, someone else is doing the teaching after that, and it's really important that you take their observations and their expert advice very seriously. It will result in a better outcome for everybody.
So, I should have said that we are going to have a Q&A session in a minute. So if you've got burning questions, or you're looking at this panel saying, why is the interviewer asking these silly questions when I've got a burning question, your moment is going to come shortly. We're going to send a roving microphone into the audience. But I just want to keep going through the process. So we've talked about the number of tests. We've talked about preparing a child for secondary school in terms of the exam. But we've also mentioned in passing the interview, and I want to start with Kat this time, just to shake it up a bit. How you've got your not a one-size-fits-all exam, but then you've got the interview as well. How important is the interview, and what should a parent be thinking about in terms of the interview?
Interview is hugely important, not least because you have the child just there one-on-one. And the interviewers know what they're looking for, whichever school it is. They know what they're looking for, and they're really looking for somebody that will fit in, that will be right in that classroom, in that environment, that somebody they'd like to teach. So everybody will be doing different forms of interviews. My advice is generally, please do not over-prep them, because we want to see the natural child. So I'll give you an example. We at Wycombe Abbey ask the girls a bit about themselves, and then we'll ask them a question that they simply couldn't prepare for. And the last thing you want is over-prep children. They couldn't prepare for this question. And last year when we asked it, one girl said, well, that's a silly question, which was fabulous. Because the next question is, well, why do you think that's a silly question? And she then expanded her answer, and you're exploring how she thinks, how she reacts, and she's explaining. She was actually very right. It was an absolutely excellent answer, and the way she then explained it. And that's really great, because you're seeing how they're thinking. So I think the best thing I think you can do with your children for interview is have them read. Make them read lots of books, because they've things to talk about. They can then use their imagination. They can express themselves a lot more freely, but not over-prepped. Some interviews will be of an academic nature. The majority are really just trying to find out, does this fit? And it sounds really, yeah, it sounds awful to say it, but we do know what we're looking for, and we can't, it's a dark art, and I can't really tell you, but we do know. And bear in mind the interviewers, we will ask the interviewers to do, we will give them briefing. They're all looking for the same thing. So your daughter, son will be interviewed by different people. Not one person can't do all of them. But we're all looking for the same thing, and we will then moderate. And when we're looking at, when we sit in a dark room for hours on end, waiting for smoke to come out the chimney, making decisions about them, interview does carry a lot of weight. And we will look, and we'll also look and see who interviewed and think, oh, they might not have had the most generous day. We go into it in great detail, the whole thing, because it's about getting the right kids. But interview is an important part of it, and that's your child to show us who they are. And if somebody's answering questions saying, well, I'm not sure about that, but, and telling us something they've clearly memorised and just been told to say that, that'll be impressive. Don't want that, want the natural child. And that's a silly question is a very good answer.
So, William, Kat won't come clean about the dark arts. You can now expose what schools are looking for in the interview, and also whether can you prep for an interview? I mean, as a politician, I obviously had a lot of media training. Can you interview train a child?
Yes. But I say interview train and not prep. And the prep is what to avoid. When our team are doing things like that, personally, when I've done it with a student, I don't let them write anything down. We talk through it, and it's really, it's straightforward stuff that their school will have been helping them with anyway. But if you go anywhere near the prep stuff, they will become robotic very quickly. They're in an institutional period of their lives. They're in a school. They're used to routines. So if you start giving them a map, they're going to start following it. And then if things deviate, and particularly at the 11 plus, where they're a bit younger when they're interviewed. So talk at home, talk around the dinner table, watch the news, discuss it, read a newspaper of some kind, maybe just a light one like is it called the Eye? Afraid I don't know anymore. But something reliable, not something trashy. Make sure they're looking, when they're on the internet, they're looking at worthwhile things. It doesn't mean it has to be headline news, but if it's not something silly to do with a computer game and it's something they're interested in, encourage it. Find out more about it yourself so you can discuss it with them. Those are the kinds of things, as you've just heard from, the horse's mouth, as it were, that the schools are looking for. That they're looking for how your children think, how they respond in conversation, in discussion, in debate. And you really can't prep and teach that, but you can help them get ready for it and get them in training.
Bridget, you talked about the interview earlier when you were talking about prepping for the exam, and at the risk of asking you to repeat yourself, but if you could expand on what you were saying earlier about the importance of the interview.
Yes, of course, and Kat is absolutely right. For interviews, what the schools are looking for, they're looking for the children and who they are, and the schools are very experienced, and they will know if children have learned answers off pat. It's not them. You won't get down to who the child is. I think it's important that the children are 10 or 11, and to think, it can potentially be quite a scary experience to be talking to an adult that they've never met. What we do, we will have the children, we will have a workshop. We'll have a workshop where somebody that we know, one of the senior school heads, will come into a workshop with them and talk to them. But it's important that it's that the aim of it is to give them confidence. But what's important is to get them to read, to get them to read the newspaper, watch the television, watch the news, and just be confident about talking about who they are and their interests. So yes, I would say that the aim of the interview practice is just the confidence, really.
Great. So I'm going to ask one last question before I throw it open to the floor, which goes to the heart of William's business, which is the vexed question of tuition. And without wishing to lead the discussion, I will confess that as well as obviously forcing my daughter to apply to 6 schools, we did get a tutor. When I say I don't want to lead the discussion, I mean one of the reasons we felt it was important to have a tutor is simply because taking an exam and having an interview is an unfamiliar thing to do, to come in cold. That's certainly why we supported it. But let's start with William and the importance of tuition, because it is, the reason I say it's a vexed question is a lot of the schools will tell you, we don't want you to tutor your child, we want the child in the raw, as it were.
Thanks for landing me in it there, Ed. Normally I get to answer this question once the school teachers have spoken. Surprising as it may seem, as someone who runs a tuition business and started life in education as a private tutor, and I said to these two lovely ladies the other day, a good private tutor should be getting fired within a space of a couple of months. You bring them in for specific problems or specific targets, such as the 11 plus. You do it carefully, and you've got to look at your child's energy levels, things like that. When in the week, don't overdo it. All right, very easy to overcook and for everything to be counterproductive, and if not damaging. So it's got to be really carefully managed. You should be very careful about who you hire, go somewhere reputable, etc. Don't listen to them and just take the neighbour's tutor. You've got no idea who they are, and your neighbour probably doesn't run a tuition business. So little, often, and really think about it. And also it should be there for very obvious things. So if you've got a weak area you've identified or school has talked about, which is going to get targeted in the 11 plus, that's what you get the tutor in for, not the whole shebang, and not every night of the week for the entire autumn term of year 6. It isn't going to end well.
Kat, I remember what Latimer told us about tutors.
I think that's good advice from William, because tuition, there's tutoring where you're trying to add something that's not there, and that comes back to putting a child in the wrong place. If you are going to tutor your child to get into the school that you want your child to go to because you think it is the best school, regardless of whether it's right for your child or not, the question is then, are you going to tutor them for 7 years whilst they are there and struggling and finding it hard? So there's tutoring where you're trying to add something that there isn't, and there's practice and confidence. And I think we're slightly hypocritical about it in a way, because we're saying don't practice, don't do this. None of us would go for a job interview without having a run through the night before with somebody or thinking about it, preparing in advance. So there's practice and filling in gaps, and there may be some gaps where perhaps your child struggles with something a little, and just it's confidence as much as anything. Exam practice, timing. Some of them are not doing exams where they're used to it at all, and so just a little bit of timing so that you do not want them going into a room and cold, never having done something before. But for me, I agree with William, but I think there is a big difference between trying to add something that's not there and just trying to help them. And I would say that, in my Latimer days, there were a lot of kids coming out of schools where they had no help from school, they had no preparation at home, they'd never done something like this before, and they did really, really, really well. And that's where you're getting the child's natural ability. And if the schools are doing the job properly, then the exams that we're setting will see that. But I said at the beginning, I have 2 golden rules, and one is there's a right place for everyone. The other is don't listen to them. And he heard me say that last week. But that's right, don't listen to them is that you are standing in the playground and our phones ring. In admissions offices, our phones ring most at around about between 9 and 9:30 and 4 and 4:30. And why is that? Because people are picking kids up from school and they're standing at the gates and saying, oh, have you heard? Did you hear? Don't listen to them. If you have a query, or Wycombe Abbey doing this, or ring us. We're the ones that know. We want to know you. We want to know your child. Ring us and we will tell you. We want to make it as easy for them as we can.
Well, I cannot believe you are dismissing the importance of playground gossip. Bridget, do you take it as a personal affront if one of your parents gets a tutor in?
I think what Kat just said about tutoring is it's about finding the right school. And I think for tutoring, there has to be, where I've seen it work, is where it's been guided by the school, and it's been very, very time-bound, and there's been clear success criteria. And I think what Kat said is actually, if a child does get into a school through tutoring, then what's going to happen for the next 7 years? And for the 11 plus process and finding the next school, it is about finding a school where someone's going to be challenged but not completely overwhelmed academically. So I think that's the message from us, you know. And if children, if there are gaps, what we do as a school, that we have 11 plus workshops led by teachers at the school who know them well. But if there are examples of children who perhaps there are some gaps, we have tutors that we may work with who we know well. And if there's that relationship between the school and it's time bound and good communication, it can work.